is Steven Marinaro, and I want to share with you my journey of how I started and pioneered the first ever search directory on the internet for salons and spas. So the year was 1999, and I had come across an old high school friend, and he was going to school to be a programmer, and I had already about maybe 9 or 10 years in the beauty industry as a hairstylist, and I was really into technology, really into video games and computers, and I said, what can I do that's revolutionary that combines technology? And back then the internet was just starting, and it was it was so new, and I said, what can I do that combines my industry with technology and the internet? So we came up with an idea of creating a search directory, and that was it. He put his programming skills to use. I gave some of my creative vision, and we created a website that allowed people to find salons on the internet. And the thing that was interesting was that it was so new that nobody was even remotely interested in doing it because no one had heard of such a thing. So, a short amount of time went on, and unfortunately we went our separate ways. And I said, hey, look, do what you want with the domain name, and I'm going on my own. And I decided to take the name salonsearch.com, which was available, and I wanted to take that concept and start my own website that was a search directory. So I created salonsearch.com, very marketable name. I got very lucky with it, and I said, I'm going to really go full force with this and do whatever I can to use my experience in the industry and make this happen. So it was the year 2000. Again, the internet was just starting to pick up. .coms were coming out left and right. Billions of dollars were being invested into these companies, and I was some young kid who had no idea what I had on my hands here. So let's go to the year 2000, when I actually first launched salonsearch.com. Now, as you can see, this was what was considered creative back then. I had no idea how to take a creative vision and apply it to a website, and I thought this was being creative because there were no examples. There was nothing out there like this. So I said, let me create a directory that had hair salons, tanning salons, spas, stuff that people can find this information online. So if people were searching in a specific area, it would pull from the database and give you search results. Now, the interesting thing was people back then were only doing newspaper ads, and I was trying to go from salon to salon on foot, making cold calling, saying, hey, look, I have this new site, Salon Search. You have to pay me for me to post your salon on my website. Now what I would do is I'd take a couple of pictures, I'd write some information, I'd say, look, the internet's big, it's new, and I, believe it or not, was getting responses from people saying, no, I'm scared of the internet. And I was like, scared of it? I'm like, this is what's happening right now. I said newspapers and that stuff is so much money and it's gonna go old. So of course, what did I do? I started advertising in newspapers, and that's how I was getting business. Is people would read the newspaper ads that I was putting out and say, oh, we're interested in advertising on your website, because it was so new and revolutionary. It's not like they were pouring in left and right, but it was so new that I got more no's because nobody knew what it was than yeses. So I struggled for the first 2 or 3 years. I kept trying to go out there. I went to events, I went to conferences, whatever I could do to get the website salonsearch.com out there to salons to say, you need to be on my site. I did it. So I had the development was interesting because I had a very close family friend of mine create this website, and he was using Cold Fusion Markup, which is .cfm, which is an extension of database programming, and it was really hardcore, this stuff, and he was an expert in this. So the site was running off of Cold Fusion, which was really interesting, and combined with HTML. So everything was done by hand, and as you can see from the look of it, there wasn't really much going on, but the database was really what was driving the whole website. So all based off of search results. So you know, I said, you know, a couple years went by. I'm like, you know what? There's nothing going on with this site. I don't know what to do. It's just nothing's happening. What can I do next? So I ended up connecting with a group of developers here that were, you know, professional company. They had their home-based business. They specialize in web development, advertising, things like that, marketing. And I joined up with them. Now, for about, I'd say maybe 2.5, 3 years, the most, I worked with this company on redeveloping the site, taking it to a whole new level. And as you can see with this new look, that's when things started changing in the year 2003. So as you can see, I went with the kind of the black look. I wanted to be really sleek, very creative. And back then, you know, programming and websites was so new that the whole thing was, how do you get found? And we were learning that the more keywords and descriptions you had on the homepage, that's how search engines were picking you up. And back then it was, you know, AOL, Ask.com, Yahoo, and, you know, Google. All these things were so new, and some of them weren't even out yet. You know, it was revolutionary. And, you know, because of these keywords, you know, as you can see on the homepage there, you know, it was just loaded with words, because that was the key, is how do people out there, the consumer, how do they find my website to then go search for salons, and then how do I go to the salons to sell it, and then that converted into sales. So it was very, very focused on keywords and text and all these things, and at the same time trying to create, obviously, a sleek look. So a few years went by, and then I decided to take that same black, sleek look and change it. So yet again, I made another update to the site, and a year later, in 2004. Just want to change things around a little bit, and I said, you know, let's make as much stuff on the homepage as possible with, you know, making it, you know, different options for searching. And again, I just wanted to experiment, because it was all trend-based. I was noticing other websites were doing certain things, and that inspired me to kind of say, hey, let's go with what the trends are doing. So after working with this company and realizing, you know, I spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. I had no investors. It was all money out of my pocket. Got myself into debt, you know, trying to launch this website. And then I heard about outsourcing. Outsourcing was when, you know, people were outsourcing work to other countries. Primarily, you know, India was big at the time, and they were doing it for a much cheaper rate. And I recall paying close to $85 an hour to this American company here, which they did a great job. We had some differences, unfortunately, towards the end. But programmers in India were charging $7 to $7.50 an hour. And I was like, holy crap. I think I might need to jump on this bandwagon with this whole outsourcing thing. So, little did I know that working with people in India was not so easy. The time difference, the culture, I mean, it was just so complicated. And it was a huge learning process of how to actually outsource and make things happen. So bring us to 2005, you know, pairing up with this company in India, I had a developer and a designer, because the developers, they don't know how to design really well, and the designers didn't really program that well. So I kind of went with, you know, two different aspects, and they worked together. Of course, you know, the designer felt he could do programming and vice versa, but I ended up using them both for specific things, and it really was exhausting. I mean, the time difference and understanding the culture, and then sometimes power outages over in India, and things would be down, and it just was crazy. But I launched a new site, and I went with more of a pink look, believe it or not, which was, I felt, hey, pink is in, I want to gear towards women, about, you know, hair and beauty, and I wanted to make the site as flashy as possible. I wanted to be, you know, people looked at the site and they were like, wow, this is incredible. I made it way too busy. I had no idea what I was getting into, and I was like, you know what, I'm done with this outsourcing. I'm completely, I want to change things up a little bit, and I went through a couple of redesigns and said, you know what, I'm going back to American designers. I just can't deal with this. Paired up with another firm here, and then created this in 2007. And this site was really, really cool. The firm was awesome, very clean, very simple, but I felt like it wasn't doing enough. You know, there were really hardly any sales. you know, here and there I'd get sales, but I kept changing my pricing around. I kept trying to get, you know, what works, what doesn't work. I tried free listings. I brought in stylists, you know, having stylists be able to put their information up. It just was a very interesting learning curve, and the trends just kept growing and growing and growing. And then I noticed more websites were being created of search directories. And you know, at the time, I remember I had partnered up with superpages.com, which was owned by, I believe, Yellow Pages or Verizon. I can't even remember, it was so long ago, but I believe Verizon had owned it at some point, and then they went into a separate company. But I was teaming up with them to provide search results from their site as well, so people can get search results from me, and if I didn't have it, they would have it. Hey, that was a pretty big deal to me, you know, partnering up with the company. Then I had partnered up with Sears, you know, to offer my clients discounts on appliances and things they could use in their salon. So I built up some pretty interesting partnerships, but nothing really major was happening where the money wasn't coming in as much as I wanted to. So that brings us to the current look and feel, which I had done in year 2011. I had used an American designer and went back to my company in India for the programming. That also cost me, you know, pretty big money, but we worked out some, you know, some bugs and made some tweaks, and you know, I'm happy to say that the site is still up and running. It's now, you know, 2013. It's free, completely free now. I decided I'm not going to be charging money. It's just people aren't paying for these types of things. You know, hey, if somebody wants to come along and buy it, you know, maybe Google can invest in this, or Facebook or something. I mean, it's got the best domain name on the internet, salonsearch.com, and it's a functional site, and it's great. So, you know, it's interesting how things have gone through my process of this company, and it's been an interesting journey, but I'm going to keep Salon Search going, and it's there for people in the industry. It's there for people searching for salons, and you know, I hope to be back a few years later with more progress and to say, hey, you know, the company's twice as big now. So that's my story with salonsearch.com, and thank you so much for listening, and take care.